And we're now recording and live stream.
Okay, sounds good. Welcome everyone to our council meeting, effectively a planning meeting, but under, of course, the auspices of a council meeting. This is council meeting number 19, Wednesday, April 13th, 2022 at 5 p.m. Oh, sorry, we started our meeting at 5 p.m. We're now resuming that meeting at 6:40 p.m. Thank you to members of the public who waited patiently for us to recommence. Certainly before I get started, I did want to acknowledge on behalf of council and the community the very sad passing of former councillor Jim Bertram. I know council has put out a statement. We just want to underscore and highlight that certainly our thoughts and prayers are with the family. Obviously, Mr. Bertram served council for a term, but moreover was a very passionate community leader and advocate, and lent a lot of energy and acumen to his time, both in public service and just as a resident of the community. So we know he will be greatly missed by family, friends, colleagues, and organizations of which he was a part. So, you know, all our condolences, obviously, to those that are affected by his loss, and the flags at the Municipal Center remain at half-mast until Sunday. We understand the funeral is on the weekend. So with that, we will recommence our meeting. We did start by going into a closed matter prior to 6:30, and I believe Ms. Bachrach-Cormier, we're ready to report out on the results of that closed session deliberation. I do want to just remind council colleagues and of course members of the public that we have already adopted the agenda, I should say, and I'll ask for a repeat of disclosures of interest only because I understand that Councillor Barclay, you do have a disclosure this evening.
Yeah, I'll be recusing myself from the refreshment food truck discussion as my employer owns property where it may impact either positively or negatively.
Understood. Okay, so Ms. Bachrach-Cormier will work with you to remove you from our virtual meeting at the appropriate time. With that, Ms. Bachrach-Cormier, could you just read, I think, the motion that reflects the decision made and closed?
Thank you, Your Worship. The motion was that Council appoint Gregory Brown as the municipal representative to the Police Services Board.
Okay, and I'll look for a mover and a seconder, please. Okay. Heather, as you know, I'm having some internet challenges in the mayor's office, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But that being said, could you just indicate who wished to move and second that?
Certainly. Your Worship, it was moved by Councillor Barclay and it was seconded by Councillor Wilson.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, any comments or questions, council colleagues, in regards to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, please. Okay, that carries. Do we have Councillor Strachian with us?
I was just about to say, I think she's actually just disconnected.
She was with us? She
messaged me that she's trying to rejoin ASP.
I think there's an internet issue broadly across North Grenville right now because a number of us seem to be having those challenges. All right.
We're watching.
Oh, indeed. Thank you very much. Okay. With that in mind, we'll carry on for the purposes of this meeting. I know that we hadn't read the land acknowledgement, colleagues, in closed. I'm wondering if someone would like to read that land acknowledgement in open, please. Would someone like to do that? Oh, great. Councillor Sullivan, fire away.
Thank you. The municipality of North Grenville acknowledges that the municipality operates on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe. We honor the historic relationship with the Haudenosaunee and Huron-Wendat peoples to this land. We recognize all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who now call North Grenville their home. We recognize We respect and support the need for cultivating a strong relationship with all Indigenous peoples, and we look forward to continuing this conversation and fostering the path towards reconciliation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sullivan. Welcome back, Councillor Strachan. I think we're both having internet challenges this evening. So we'll do our best to keep an eye on your screen in case you drop out. We did just call the vote on Mr. Gregory Brown. And I don't know if we want to redo that, colleagues, just so Councillor Strachan has the benefit of voting. Would you like us to redo that vote, Councillor Strachan?
It's not required on my behalf. I agree with the decision made.
Okay, thank you. All right, we will move on then. As you can see, colleagues, there is just one item under the consent agenda, and that's the council meeting minutes from March 9th. So I'll look for a mover and a seconder to adopt that single item that's featured under the consent agenda. Good, thank you, Councillor Strachan and Barclay. And I'll call the vote, trusting there are no comments on this single item. Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, thank you. Moving on, of course, we are here this evening for two public meetings in regards to important matters, some of which have been lingering for some time, particularly a food truck bylaw. But prior to going there, we do have a plan of subdivision on Heard Street, for which a public meeting is now required. So I am going to read Ms. Bachrach-Cormier the public meeting preamble that is required by the province.
Yes, please, Your Worship.
Good. Okay. So council will now hold a public meeting to consider an application for the lands located at part of lot 25, concession 3, Heard Street, for the plan of subdivision 07T20212 Heard Street. The purposes of this application is to permit the development of a residential subdivision on private services. The proposed subdivision will be comprised of 7 new lots, each with a single detached dwelling and internal road network on approximately 3.84 hectares. Any person may attend the public meeting or make written or oral submissions, either in support or in opposition. In the event that you are unable to attend the meeting but wish to submit written comments, please ensure that your comments are delivered to the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville, attention Sherry Mills, prior to the day of the meeting. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at the public meeting or written submissions to the United Counties in respect to the proposed plan of subdivision before the approval authority gives or refuses to give approval to the draft plan, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So are there people here for this public meeting in regards to Heard Street in particular? Thank you, Mr. Mosher. Anyone else? Mr. Noseworthy, thank you. So that's great. I see Ms. Zander is here as a as a representative of the applicant. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Worship, I am, as well as Chris Clark from my office. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else that I haven't
Mr.
acknowledged?
Scott, the applicant, is here as well.
Mr. Scott. Okay, thank you. And I see Ms. Laverne, Mr. and Ms. Laverne. Is that right? Do I have that right? Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. And Mr. Scott, of course, we acknowledge as the applicant. Great. So I will pass it over to Deputy Director of Planning, Crystal Landstra, for the presentation, and then we'll carry on with the public meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So through you to council, the municipality has been circulated on a plan of subdivision from the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville. The proposed plan of subdivision is located on Heard Street. Next slide. So the subject lands are approximately 3.8 hectares and they're located on Heard Street and they are currently vacant. So the lands are on the eastern side of Heard Street with approximately 20 meters of frontage, and the lands are just outside of the Kemptville Urban Service area. Next slide. So the surrounding land uses we have to the north is Kemptville Creek, and there is residential on the north side of the creek. To the south, there's existing rural residential uses. To the east, we have existing rural an existing rural residential subdivision that's accessed by Merrick Trail, and then it goes to school board property. And to the west, we have Heard Street and existing rural residential uses. Next slide, please. So the official plan designation for the lands are, the majority is rural residential, and there is floodplain hazard designation that's along the Kemptville Creek waterfront. There's also steep slope identified in this area. It's on the end of the property that's closer to Heard Street, that's close to the creek. And the area by the waterfront is also wooded, so there is a woodlands designation showing from natural heritage features. Next slide, please. So the proposed plan of subdivision, it has 7 lots proposed, with 1 lot to include an additional residential unit for affordable housing. There is an internal road that's connecting all the proposed lots from a cul-de-sac that would extend out to Heard Street, and the subdivision is to be privately serviced. So the purpose of this meeting is to receive public comments and comments from members of council. And the comments received will be considered by municipal staff in the preparation of the municipal planning staff recommendation, and will also be provided to the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville for their consideration. Next slide, please. So before you can see the draft plan of subdivision that was submitted with the application. So the draft plan shows the internal road with the cul-de-sac that accesses the proposed 7 lots. And there's block 1 that runs along the waterfront with the intent of placing the natural hazards and the natural heritage features into one ownership. So there is stormwater management that's also being considered for the plan of subdivision, and stormwater is expected to be discharged from the proposed road surface, and it would come between lots 3 and 4 on the draft plan through block 1 to the river. Each lot has a proposed well and septic, and the appropriate studies have been completed to ensure the services can work for the proposed lot sizes. Next slide, please. So a review of policy shows planning documents are supportive of the proposed development. The provincial policy statement supports residential development on rural lands, as is this parcel, where it's locally appropriate. And that provincial policy is kept broad enough to allow for unique municipal interpretations and to ensure that it is appropriate in the local context. Then moving closer, for the United Counties official plan defines what is locally appropriate, and it permits limited residential development on rural lands, which they then require to be further defined in the municipal official plan. Next slide, please. So then we move closer to home with the North Grenville official plan, which designates the lands as rural residential. And this permits low density single detached dwelling developments through a plan of subdivision, which is being proposed. It sets out general lot sizes to which the development is structured around. Therefore, that principle of land use is established, and the proposed plan of subdivision is supported on the subject lands, subject to all the other applicable policies within the document. And we've addressed a few of these for you to see in the presentation. These policies speak to elements of the development, such as access, compatibility with neighboring lands, servicing, and environmental considerations. And staff note that the applicant can successfully meet the majority of official plan policy outlined within the official plan. Through municipal review, we have identified specific areas that were anticipated to produce additional detail that will be brought forward at the time of decision. The proponent has been receptive to these comments, and staff have been working and progressing the file positively to address the outstanding details. Next slide, please. So I'll just highlight the few things we're still discussing with the applicant. Section 11.3.1 of the official plan speaks to availability of housing, and this is where our affordability policies are located, which state the municipality endeavors to have at a minimum 25% of all new residential development to be affordable. So the staff report does propose that house plans for one of the 7 lots include an accessory apartment, and staff note that for this unit, 25% of that 7 units is 1.75 units, which would require 2 units for affordability. Considering this, however, staff do acknowledge that the official plan encourages innovative designs to broaden just the overall selection of housing alternatives within the municipality. And while it's not a current design standard to consider additional residential units within original servicing reporting, the developer is willing to ensure the lands be designed to support as many additional residential units as possible. And this speaks to staff acknowledging individual servicing in a lot of our rural residential lands is a limiting factor for the creation of additional residential units. And this can often be a barrier for adding additional residential units and having them realized on our landscapes. So staff do support the approach to create the environment for affordable units. And we see the value in designing the design work to progress forward that municipal initiative related to affordable housing. Next slide. We are still looking, staff noted in our review that a stage 3 archaeological report is required to support the development and has been proposed as a condition of approval. Based on official plan policy, staff prefer any reporting that is to be incorporated into any new development plans be provided prior to any decision of draft plan approval. We acknowledge that there may be a scenario where the timing can be varied, and staff are continuing to work with the developer to get the additional detail to bring forward. Next slide. And our final area of discussion still ongoing is block 1 of the proposed plan of subdivision, which has been created to encompass the natural heritage features and natural hazard features associated with Kemptville Creek. And while staff are generally supportive of the approach to not further fragment sensitive environmental features, staff do not recommend block 1 be conveyed to the municipality. The official plan states it's not the intention of all natural heritage features to be brought into public ownership, and policy also speaks to natural hazards being considered through a long-term program to evaluate which lands the municipality will acquire. So staff have reviewed block 1 and have considered the suggestion of public ownership of the hazard lands. And based on our review of the hazards due to the floodplain and slope instability, as well as the limited value that the small portion of isolated waterfront would provide to the overall network for public space, it's not recommended that the lands be placed in public ownership. Next slide. So this is just to give a bit of background because there is no floodplain acquisition program to which the official plan is speaking. So in terms of where staff were looking for guidance to review to determine whether this is a piece of land that the municipality should be looking to acquire, we looked at the Parks, Recreation and Culture Master Plan for guidance. And it speaks a bit to the location of where we should be taking these, the amount of frontage on public roads there should be for blocks of land that we're acquiring. And it outlines objectives to determine when you're looking at public acquisition, and they're listed on the slide. We're to be looking for linking and enhancing of the active transportation network. And these lands that are proposed are isolated and do not link to any other existing waterfront trails. And creating a linkage would prove difficult with the lands already developed beside these lands. And further, the lands include hazards and steep slopes that would not enhance the active transportation network, but could create additional challenges in creating accessible trails to include in our network. It also speaks to protecting natural habitat in areas of cultural significance, often in partnership with others. The lands have been previously disturbed, and much of the regrowth within the floodplain is invasive species that grow easily in the area. While opportunities for renaturalization exist, there are stewardship principles outlined in the official plan that would be adequate to meet the required provincial and local policy. And then the general objective of improving public access to the waterfront. And with the isolated nature of this portion, public access is not the principal driver of this land acquisition request, and rather it's for the protection of natural heritage and natural hazards, both of which can adequately be done with the use of other planning tools. Next slide. So that is a summary of where we are in terms of staff review of policy for the Heard Street subdivision. Staff have compiled municipal comments, and we have sent those to the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville. And it is understood that the applicant's working with their consultants to address the comments that we've raised. And it's noted that the comments may also result in amended lot configuration and updated draft plan that was shown in the presentation. So any amendments to the draft plan of subdivision will be brought back forward to a future council meeting for consideration. And staff will also bring forward recommendations for conditions of draft plan approval at that time. So I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Ms. Lanstra. So as per the public meeting, I'll give council colleagues an opportunity to ask any questions of staff before we move to the applicant and then members of the public. Colleagues, any questions for Ms. Lanstra? Councillor Sullivan, please.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Ms. Lanstra. Just to clarify for me, please, if the block 1 is not turned over to the municipality, who actually then owns it? That's one question.
Sure. So through Mayor to Council, this is one of the details we're still working with the county and the developer on. There is the ability to reconfigure the lots to include the land within the actual lot fabric is an option, and then we would use other land use tools to protect those features, such as zoning or different covenants that you can do through the agreement. There is also the option, there are other keepers of land that could potentially own a piece of land like this. So there's other options that can be discussed when we're still working with the developer, the Conservation Authority, and the county on this.
Thank you. And the one other question is, what is the approximate size of the lots? You said 0.4 hectares, but how does that compare to acres, please?
Sure. So we are looking around, the majority of them, when you average it out, they are around 0.4 hectares, which is around an acre. So that is the goal. There are a few that are above that size. There's a few that are just underneath, but the overall density is around that 1 acre size for each lot.
And I'm sorry, one more question. So you did mention that 25% for affordable housing would mean basically 2 of the 7 lots should have some feature that would allow a secondary residence in the unit, or secondary residential unit. So why is there only 1?
So there's
Go
still,
ahead,
so through you, Madam Mayor, to Council, we still are discussing this element. What is being presented is what was originally submitted, but we have been speaking with the developer to look at where there could be any adjustments where possible. So we have identified that as a number. We are also looking at, so in the official plan, there is an ability to look at kind of those innovative approaches and considering design innovations as well as that strict number, because the number is an annual number for the entire municipality. So the goal is to move us closer to what we can get and progress us towards those goals. And something we've been discussing is the actual design of affordable housing units. And that's something the developer's working on now. So while they're proposing one be built out, they're also designing the lands so that those who own them would not need to do any additional review to create 2 additional residential units per each lot.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Parkley?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Deputy Director Lanstra. 2 questions. First of all, the developer should be commended for having at least 1 affordable housing unit as part of their plans. I thought that it was a goal for each new development to have 25% rather than a municipal-wide percentage. Am I mistaken?
Ms. Lanstra?
So the language is it is encouraging that, and that is what we are pushing towards. But there is some flexibility to consider other if there's other options offered, if it's something that we feel could be supporting that overall goal as much as the actual units themselves. There is some flexibility to look at that as well, because in some plans of subdivision, especially those on private servicing in the rural area, it is tough to get the types of affordable housing that we're looking for, which is that higher density, smaller units. So anything we can do to get towards that affordable housing goal is what we're trying to achieve. Amy, I'll defer to you as well if you have anything to add to that.
Amy?
Thank you, Deputy Director. Through your worship, just to follow up on the point of the housing affordability policy that we amended into the official plan in December, it's to be considered as part of every development. So every developer bringing forth a planning application must address the affordable housing piece, how they're going to meet it, how they're not going to meet it, what they're going to do to try and to support the municipality's endeavors in creating more affordable units. Certainly additional residential units are one of those mechanisms in which we can look at creating affordable units. Certainly there is a demand for rental. I think that all the efforts on the housing strategy and our affordable housing strategy have pointed to those facts. So to that end, yes, all residential development has to address our policy. They have to speak to it in their planning rationale, how they're going to meet it, how they're not going to meet it. It's a target. So we do, like the Deputy Director did mention, we do allow for some flexibility in that there might be other community benefits a project may be providing, and it's up to the developer to define what that is. So on a case-by-case basis, we'll be reviewing how they're addressing the policy, looking for other alternative and creative ways. I think, in our rural residential subdivisions, I was, really happy to see that all the engineering studies on the servicing side are considering the up to 2 additional residential units beyond the principal dwelling, which again ensures that down the road, when someone contemplates putting one on their property, they don't have to go through the additional studies required to determine could it be supported. So we're trying to be more forward thinking in that way. So to that end, to answer Councillor Barclay's question, it is something the developers do have to speak to as part of their planning rationale. And we're starting to develop the monitoring system as to that 25% municipal wide target as well.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Director Martin. I understand that it is a goal, and I do appreciate the developer for making a movement towards that goal, and the fact that we're being flexible in what we consider as efforts to achieve that goal. So my second question relates to Block 1, and I'm thinking of our strategic plan, which is a 10-year document, and our desire to have more access to the waterfront. And I do appreciate that there's a pre-existing development between that Block 1 and the Riverside Park property. But I do know that there's an existing pathway along, at least as far as that existing development, along the South Branch that fronts, or Riverside Park that fronts the South Branch. So I'm thinking for the future, it would be desirable for us to, when we have the opportunity to acquire waterfront property, and the problem of connecting them into a contiguous path, we can leave to maybe other councils if the occasion arises. So I personally would have an appetite to have that Block 1 become property of the municipality, looking down the road and how do we satisfy our goal of increasing the waterfront access, understanding that it's problematic right now, but for the future. So that's just a comment.
Thank you, Councillor Barclay. Through Mayor, I have noted that comment and we'll take it back for consideration.
Thanks.
Okay. Are there other questions? I know I have one, and I think I've just lost my internet connection that shows my video. So I'll try to get in, but I'll proceed with the question, and I apologize, council colleagues, if you would like to ask a question, if you could verbally indicate that to myself or raise your hand, and the clerk will make sure that you are acknowledged. So I'm just taking a look at the map and the impacts of this, proposed subdivision. I know we're in a public meeting on neighboring properties. I know, we are hearing lots in the municipality when, subdivisions or developments emerge, that people really have a strong interest in seeing tree buffers, in really diminishing impacts, if you will, between neighboring properties, but more to the point, also just preserving tree canopy to some extent, recognizing, of course, that obviously with the establishment of new homes comes some loss of trees. So I'm just curious, can you help me understand, Ms. Landstra, is there an opportunity to establish a tree buffer of some sort? I'm just taking a look at the lands on my phone because I've lost my laptop internet connection, and I see that there is a treed area in there. Is there a way that we can build greenery, sort of between, between those setbacks, if you will? And if you could help me understand what the setbacks are in this case, but because this is a subdivision proposal, so I just want to understand and make sure that members of the public understand what are the stipulated setbacks, and is there that opportunity to create a bit of a tree buffer, if you will, so that the impacts of these additional 7 homes wouldn't necessarily compromise people's experience of their properties in other neighborhoods, because I can see Berg Crescent, Merrick Trail, right, are likely the 2 streets where some residents would be impacted in particular. So appreciate you
Sure.
taking the time to answer that question. Thanks.
Sure. So through Madam Mayor to council and the public, there is the ability to look at tree preservation, and you can add kind of landscape provisions through a condition that we could propose for the United Counties, and we could build something into the subdivision agreement. That's all relatively typical for plans of subdivision. I do know that the developer has already done a good amount of their work considering the trees that are already on the property. They have looked at where they can to retain trees on the property. There is one element to keep in mind when we're looking at the redevelopment of a parcel like this, the stormwater management and the grading of a subdivision. Oftentimes, to make sure that we're dealing with that, we do need to be cognizant that maybe not every tree can be kept to get that, but we can definitely look at a balance of preserving what is available to preserve and building that into our documents. And I know that the applicant and developer has been really driving that as well, because they would like their property to be built out with those considerations.
Okay. So I'm just, before turning it over to Mr. Scott, who I think would like to speak, I'm just going to ask council, is there anything else you'd like to ask of staff before we go to the applicant? Councilor Barclay, go ahead.
Sure. I wonder if there's been any thought of connecting this new subdivision to pre-existing subdivision by way of a pathway or pedestrian walkway. I'm thinking of maybe the families that are moving in there have school-age children, and for them to get to school, they would have to walk out to Herd and then down to Concession and take the long route. And knowing children, they like to take the short route. So whether there is a provision for access to, I guess it's Merrick Trail or not, I'm sure one will be created through their through their activity. So I'm just wondering if that's been a consideration or whether it could be a consideration.
Sure. So through the mayor to Councillor Barclay, I did look at opportunities for connection. One thing to look at, usually because Merrick Trail is already built out, there isn't any connections built on that side of the subdivision. It's private land right up to that edge of the property. So we could build in a connection on this side of the property, but it would not make it all the way to the road allowance on the other side. We could look at something like that with the hope at some point we could take land, but it's more difficult to do that if that existing subdivision hasn't already been planned for that connection.
Okay. Thank you. I know that we'll go to Councillor Sullivan, and I do want to recognize that there were others who wished to speak, I believe at a certain point, but we'll go to Councillor Sullivan before turning it over to the applicant and members of the public. Go ahead, Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And in response to Councillor Barclay's comments, I had looked at that myself because I think it would be great if people could get through and link into Merrick Trail and into Riverside Park. So the section considered block 1 of this new subdivision plan, is there an equivalent block of land along the waterfront to at the Berglund Estates, or do all of their properties go straight back to the water without that block 1? Because if there could be some way of getting along there and connecting into Riverside Park, it would be ideal. But I don't know if there is any public access or potential.
So the neighboring subdivision does not have any public land between the creek and the private residences. It's private land straight to the water's edge.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yeah, because I had looked at that as well. It would be great, but okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Councillor Wilson during this period of questions for staff, and I'll put myself on the list. Okay, Councillor Wilson, go ahead.
Hi, this through you, Madam Mayor, to Crystal Langstra. This may not be a question for them, but it may be for the developer. So what would be the impact on the Heard Street concession road as far as traffic access during the construction period? Or is that a relevant question to ask at this time?
Go ahead, Ms. Langstra.
Sure. So through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Wilson, there was a traffic report that was completed with the subdivision. I don't recall, I may need to defer to Ms. Zander because I'm not sure that it included the construction phase. I know it did speak just in general to the subdivision because of the low density of the subdivision. There's no anticipated impacts to that road based on its already heavy use as a connector. So it's not anticipated that the overall subdivision would. Every construction does have some sort of impact, but I'm not entirely sure whether those documents spoke to the construction phase.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure that as plans evolve, some of that may become more clear. Is that right, Ms. Lanstra? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I certainly know, I'm aware, even in smaller subdivisions where you're just building a few houses, that some of the impacts in terms of noise, et cetera, are certainly felt by neighboring properties or neighborhoods. So we should certainly keep an eye on that. Yeah.
I can speak. So we would have our typical subdivision agreement, which speaks to the overall construction of a subdivision, and you can put conditions in that do relate to those elements. So we could control for any impacts through our subdivision agreement.
Yes, given that Heard Street is, I think, while heavily used, I acknowledge, certainly in terms of a commuter route, is, I would imagine, extremely quiet, right, at certain hours when people are back home from work. I think there would be, certainly we would take comfort in making sure that there were some limitations on that construction schedule, of course, if things proceed. Okay, council colleagues, anything else? I don't see anything. So at this point, I did see that Mr. Scott, the applicant, has his hand up. So I'll go to Mr. Scott, and then I invite any members of the public to ask questions or raise concerns should they have them. Mr. Scott?
Good evening. Thanks for having us here tonight. I was only going to comment specifically on the tree portion. That part of the draw for me in this development is the trees.
Mhm.
And working around the trees as much as we can. When I surveyed for everything topographically, we surveyed every single tree on the property and have planned around as many of those trees that aren't in the road or the cul-de-sac will be preserved basically. And there's considerations on my side for being able to relocate some of the larger coniferous trees to other portions of the property, because I don't want to disrupt what this property has. The neighbors, I'm positive, have looked back there for years and enjoyed what they have, and I don't want to disrupt that other than put some nicely placed homes amongst these big mature trees. So that we had a letter through the county came, and that was that person's concern. Tree line along the south side, like I have no intentions or necessity to disrupt the tree lines as they are now. So we're basically going to work around what's there, and if we can and it's practical, relocate the healthy ones that can be. That's a consideration I have as well. So and definitely speaking to Councillor Wilson's concern traffic wise, we have a good access off of Heard to get in there, and all our staging. Really the only type of disruption we would have is at the very initial stage where we're building that mouth of our road between the two houses. Once that is in, we have plenty of room to stage, get off of Heard Street to unload equipment, because I'm very aware of how busy it is, just from the couple times we've been there with equipment. So at this point, I want to turn it over to Tracy Zander, who will speak on my behalf for the majority of our presentation. Thank you.
If I could just ask one quick follow-up, and thank you, Mr. Scott, for those comments.
Yep.
It certainly, again, as is the case for any development in North Granville where there is a treed area that might be impacted, we certainly appreciate what you're suggesting here in terms of integrating, these homes among or within, right, that existing tree canopy. To that end, could you or Ms. Zander possibly tell us what percentage of trees do you think you can preserve on sort of the back ends of those lands, right? Which would be, I think, where neighbors would feel, the biggest impact if there was a loss of trees.
Yeah.
Could you or Ms. Zander guesstimate what that landscape would look like?
My eastern edge and my southern edge, I have zero intentions of any of those trees needing to be removed. The homes will be built further in from the backyards, I guess, the setbacks at the back.
So
will be
closer
much bigger.
towards Heard, is that right? You're looking at
more closer to my road will be where we would place our homes versus going to the back edges. Yeah, that's right.
You mean the internal road that you're building?
Yeah. Okay. So really, like the tree lines that are there, the east and the south, I was gonna anticipate like 100% preservation. If we have to cut down a dead tree to clear it out as a hazard, that would be the extent of it. The trees that are on those back property lines of the existing two, I have zero need to. They're just part of what's already there, part of what every new development strives for, which is these natural buffers that are hard to put in brand new open subdivisions. So we have them, and I definitely, like, that's been since day one when I met with Collards on site and in the office to design the subdivision. It was every single consideration was to be about the trees. So I'm not going about it like saying it's just, that's the beauty of this subdivision. These big mature trees that are all over it are going to add the character that I have appreciated just as a drive-by citizen looking in there since I've been in North Granville. So yeah.
So to that end, how large are those backyards that you're proposing? Maybe if you can't answer that, Ms. Zander how large are these properties? The proposed properties?
Yeah, like the ones that are on the southern side, which
Mhm.
would be against Merrick, I think they're all very close to the 1 acre size, and we'll have very generous backyards. As I say, we will be closer to my new road than we will
Okay.
be to the backs of the properties. So there'll be nice natural buffers there.
Okay, and I assume that's also to accommodate septic systems, right? Which are
Yeah.
part of this. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. Okay. Ms. Zander, do you have anything to add in that respect?
Sure. Good evening, Mayor Peckford, council members, staff. Nice to see you all. Just speak very briefly to the trees, and I've made a note of that question. Each lot has a lot development plan, which is included in the engineering package. So I don't have that at my fingertips, but we can certainly provide you with that information. But yeah, each lot has a building envelope and a septic envelope depicted, and the balance of each lot, of course, would meet or exceed the required zoning setbacks. So certainly any of the setbacks in the side and rear yards, those are definitely areas where trees can be retained, as Kevin has mentioned. But I'll try to get a little bit more information for you in a kind of resubmission back to staff so that council will have that information. Other than that, I'm going to defer to one of my planning staff, Chris Clark, to provide a brief presentation just to comment on some of the matters that were raised by Crystal. And then we are all certainly happy to answer questions from council or from members of the public. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, this is Chris. So I just wanted to speak quickly about the trees. Kevin mentioned the south and east side. I want to mention that the trees along the Kempville Creek, where sort of the floodplain area and some of the natural heritage is, the majority of those trees are below the slope hazards that have been identified on that side of the property. So development would not be permitted below those slope hazards. So all those trees, you know, within the creek and that slope should be maintained. Kevin has also spoken briefly with RVCA about naturalizing the shoreline. So as we sort of figure out what's happening here with Block 1, we could possibly look at maybe removing some of the invasive species and replanting with some more native species along the shoreline there. In terms of lot sizes, as Crystal mentioned, everything is generally close to 1 acre. I mean, there's a couple lots that are slightly smaller. I will note that Block 1 sort of cut into 4 of the lot areas quite a bit because it was set aside. If that were included in some of the lots, though, it wouldn't really make much of a difference because that's all in the slope hazard and in the natural heritage. So, you know, it would increase the lot size, but the developable area would be relatively the same no matter what we do there. So in terms of Block 1, I mean, we've seen lots of different comments of, you know, we don't want to retain it or we don't want to own it. Personally, you know, I don't think Kevin cares too much whether the municipality owns it or it's made part of the lots, but yeah, I mean, some type of direction on that would be good so that we know what to expect moving forward. If there's going to be pathway systems and stuff that we want to look at it putting in there, I think we need to be cognizant of the archaeological find that's in there and what, you know, changing that area and making pathways and making it, you know, for public use would do to that. I don't know, like I'm not an archaeologist, so I don't know what impact that kind of stuff would have. So I think we need to look at that. The archaeological find, just so everyone knows, is in below the slope hazards in that natural area. So it's well outside of the lots or the developable areas. In terms of the affordable unit provision, our planning report did mention one affordable unit. That's what we discussed sort of at the beginning. These affordable unit policies were just being put in place at the time we were doing our report. So it was kind of brand new. We were just sort of working through it a bit. The developer is committed to designing these houses so that there would be rear yard and garage access to allow basement units to be made into secondary units. So I think that's his intention on all of the lots, is to sort of design them that way. So I guess the question for us would be, do we have to contemplate that in the design now? Like, do we have to say we have affordable units, or is it enough to design the buildings to allow future owners or tenants to convert that to affordable units? I think that's sort of, where we're at now is if we provide one or two with units now with the ability for the rest to have additional units, is that enough to sort of meet the affordability standards that you're looking for? Otherwise, if I'm missing any topics or issues, let me know, but I think that was everything that was raised so far.
Okay. Council colleagues, well, of course, I'm and the mayor's office is maybe obvious from the flags. I've just lost the video connection, so I can hear you all from audio. So I'm going to try to rejoin. But in the meantime, I just had a quick question about the secondary units. I see that I'm back, so that's awesome. Just quickly, and then I'll go to Mr. Mosher. I guess, in terms of affordability, we know there is a very severe lack of rental units in North Grenville. And I believe that if you're going to build properties that can incorporate that granny suite, right, basement apartment that may be used for elderly parents, or a youth, someone's child who may be in their early 20s and not able to afford a home, it would seem to me to be far more practical, and it would certainly allow us to meet some of that affordability imperative that we set out in policy. I certainly would have a strong preference to see 2 additional sort of residential units or secondary suites incorporated into the primary builds. I think it certainly would also enhance the property values of those new homes if those granny suites existed. I hear that in every instance that may not be desirable, and you may be marketing your homes, right, to allow for that possibility without them being fully built or established, but I would certainly have an appetite to see if you can get to 2, not 1. But that's certainly my opinion at this stage. I would like to recognize Mr. Mosher. He has his hands up, and of course he's with the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority. Welcome, Mr. Mosher.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I would like to maybe speak just a bit about Block 1 more than anything. Our office had provided some written comments to the county as well as the municipality on March 8th regarding the subdivision. For the most part, we think that the subdivision is generally consistent with the official plan. There's a few minor tweaks to some of the reports, but we were able to participate in a meeting with the applicant, municipal staff, and other agents from the applicant at a meeting in late March just to discuss some of the clarifications we'd be looking for. So that was a positive meeting, and we think that all of that can be addressed. With respect to Block 1, I think it's certainly our office's opinion, and it seems to be past practice within the municipality of North Grenville that regardless of whether there's connectivity today for waterfront lands, that they be placed into public ownership for the future. Where I would note that the official plan plans for not just a today planning horizon, but envisions 20 years and beyond. And that while there might not be the ability to connect a waterfront trail at this time, in the future, there may be. It's only 278 meters to Riverside Park to the east. And in our opinion, as a conservation authority, the placing of hazard lands into public ownership is one of the best ways to ensure that there is protection of those lands for the long term, as well as the people that are adjacent to them. So we think, and it's our strong recommendation, that those lands should be transferred to the municipality, and that certainly would bear out with past practice for other developments within this area. We disagree with staff respectfully that the lands should be maintained in private ownership, and we think that there could be the possibility of like a third party, like another group that would take on ownership, but we just don't think that that would be in the best interests of the municipality in the long term. Our interpretation of certain sections of the official plan, as well as the Parks, Recreation, and Master Plan, is that waterfront lands are prioritized for these land acquisitions to be built into future pathway connections for future residents to enjoy. And even if the lands are floodplain or hazard, that doesn't mean that that would preclude them from being part of a future pathway system. Yes, there are some of those concerns, and there would need to be some, study and delicate design proposed for these areas, but they can certainly be incorporated into pathway connections for future. So that's the one point that I think I just really wanted to raise, to be able to highlight the difference of opinion that our office has at this time.
Mr. Mosher, can I just ask you, from your perspective, the acquisition of those lands, setting aside, waterfront trail connectivity or what have you, is part of your recommendation informed by just preserving what you see as sort of, a part of a fragile ecosystem, if you will, in and around the creek? Are you being equally informed by environmental considerations, or is it also recreational? I just want to, what's at the basis of your core concern, if you will?
Sure. Fundamentally, as a CA, we have a delegated responsibility by the province and an agreement with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing to speak on behalf of Section 3.1 of the provincial policy statement. These are the sections of the provincial policy statement that govern how the municipality should plan for site hazards and natural hazards.
Right.
So fundamentally, that's the basis of our concern, is the hazard lands and the ability for those lands to be kept alone and just allowed to let the hazard expand and contract as it needs to. And if there was ever some sort of, a flood or a slumping or something like that, it's primarily for protection of those lands. In making that opinion, we still are informed by other policies that exist, whether that be an official plan, a Parks Recreation Master Plan, or other policies. So the basis of the comment is Section 3.1 of the PPS, but there's other documents that inform our planning opinions too.
Okay, that's helpful to me. Thank you very much. I would like to recognize Councillor O'Sullivan, and then of course I'll go to Mr. Scott.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Mosher. Nice to see you for that information regarding Block 1. I had already decided that I wanted to make a comment that I think it would be wise for the municipality to have ownership of that land of Block 1, particularly if there's ever a possibility of gaining any other lands that could make a complete connection all the way to Riverside Park, which would be great for people for students to access North Grenville High School and to get to Riverside Park. So I think that's very good, a good long-term plan. And so thank you very much, Mr. Mosher.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Mr. Scott, please.
Hi, thanks for the chance to speak again. I just wanted to follow up on something Chris brought up that really I think should be considered by councillors' recommendations as well. What we end up doing with this Block 1 is our archaeological find in there is going to require a fairly stout buffer around it. Like that buffer is going to come up the slope where I'm not able to develop anyway. As far as it's going to go into the creek. It's going to go in all directions. I believe it's, please don't quote me on this, but I think it's like 50 meters. It's a fairly aggressive buffer. It will not, I'm speaking now from memory, you will not be able to develop between that archaeological find and the creek. You will not have a pathway through there. What they discovered was bricks, a floor. If they get to say that, it's a floor of something. This was former area of a brickyard along the creek there. So that's what they're protecting, and I'm all for it. It's already well protected by slope stability rules. It's well protected by shoreline protection, and it's well protected. The shoreline is well guarded, I guess, by, we have heritage and we have Ministry of Natural Resources that'll both have their say in this. But I ultimately, with that archaeological find, I'm pretty confident in saying that that'll sever anything you want to do between Heard Street Bridge and Riverside Park. Not to mention you'd have to expropriate land all along that as Mr. Mosher points out, it's 247 meters of privately held land. Like you would have to somehow get that back. I understand that's been done before, but this archaeological find is your bigger hurdle, which isn't going away.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Scott. Appreciate the perspective. I see Ms. Zander there, and then we'll go to the Laverne family. Go ahead, Ms. Zander.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't see anywhere on my screen to raise my hand with a little icon. I'm searching for it. Anyways, appreciate your acknowledgement. Just another thought, and I think we will continue the discussion around Block 1. As Phil has indicated, we've already had some discussions with staff, but one thing we need to ponder is if the municipality wants ownership of Block 1, how do you get to it, right? Because the way we've drawn it on the draft plan, it's landlocked essentially. It's along the river and I guess touches Heard Street, but I don't think it's necessarily accessible from the Heard Street road allowance because of the slope there. So if the municipality wants the block and then you want access to the block, that requires some kind of easement or a ownership of a strip of land from Mr. Scott's subdivision lands, which further diminishes the acreage he has to work with in these 7 lots, which are already, as we've heard, around 1 acre in size. But I guess we need to carefully think about if the municipality also wants access to that block, what does that do for the subdivision configuration and how, and then if it's land that the public would have access to, as is often the case with lands owned by the municipality, are we now talking about a pathway for the public to get to Block 1, which may not be that desirable in terms of protecting the natural heritage features, safety of the slope there, and so on. So I guess just a few other things to think about in the discussion of whether transferring Block 1 to the municipality is the best decision. So just wanted to throw those things out.
Certainly. I guess I would ask staff to contemplate, obviously the primary consideration, given what I'm understanding from Mr. Mosher, is environmental. And if that's the case, I don't think we necessarily need to work with the assumption that the lands would have public access if part of what we're trying to protect is a fragile ecosystem in and around the creek. So again, I don't pretend to know all of the complexity of how you protect fragile lands, or if any resident just has the right to traverse those lands as they wish. But certainly the environmental considerations, I think, certainly from my perspective, and I assume given other comments, council's perspective, would be primary, and perhaps assumptions about access could be better fleshed out so that we are clear about why we might want the acquisition of those lands from an environmental protection perspective, if nothing else. As things evolve over time, 10, 20, 30 years, hard to say how perhaps some of those lands will change, or maybe to Mr. Scott's point, because of the archaeological significance of what we're hearing was discovered, those lands will always be off limits, but not. I don't believe there's any harm in protecting them if that's the most effective way to proceed. I'm going to acknowledge the Laverne family. Welcome. We invite your comments. If in fact it is the Laverne family, you please introduce yourself with your names. You are still on mute, so you just have to unmute. There should be a button on the left-hand side of your screen towards the bottom that says unmute.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Technologically slow here.
That's okay. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to listen in these discussions. Very interesting. And obviously, as an adjacent property, we have some certainly not opposed to the development. I've met with Mr. Scott a few times when he's been around and things like that. And, I think we share some common interests in that property in the back. But we do have, I have 4 or 5, I guess I would call them considerations, issues of concern, which is more than what can be discussed here tonight, I'm sure. But we will put something in writing and send it into the county before the deadline in May. But probably the 2 most pressing issues is first of all, the management of stormwater and runoff, whether it's spring melt or it's heavy rains, and we seem to be getting heavier and heavier types of rains there with climate issues and things of that nature. So the natural slope of that land from south to north down towards the creek, and then there's a bit of a break off that slopes into the back of our property at 55 Heard. I heard one mention earlier in the discussion, I think it was when the deputy director was going over the plan about to manage the flow of the stormwater or runoff between lot 3 and 4, which is in the far back corner of the property, but there's different slopes as we go through this. And I know when we looked at the documents that the county sent to us, some of them need to be an engineer to understand, but certainly talked about the use of swales. And we're trying to understand what these swales are, and are they just simply a channel between the properties that redirects water to a lower area? And how does that impact, or how does that prevent additional runoff and stormwater from coming down into the back of our property, depending on the height of the lands that when the properties are completed behind there? So that would be my first issue, and we can certainly, if someone wants to respond to that, we can. We don't know if there's a plan for these swales. That's something that you can visualize, but anyway, and then we'll go to the next issue.
Sounds good. Okay, who would like to take the swale question? Is it Ms. Andrew? Will you take that? Okay, go ahead. Chris, is that Chris? No, it's Mr. Scott. Okay. Okay. Hi, Kevin.
Yeah, to address that, for sure, the grading is a engineered plan, for sure. And at the end of the day, all the water that we generate will end up running into our stormwater down an outlet between lot 3 and 4. So even the water off the lot right east of your backyard will all get directed to the road, into the manholes, and out in that outlet. I do have a copy like of a drainage plan. I'd be more than happy to stop by someday and show it to you and help you understand that each property is responsible for its water that's generated on that property. So it will not, I can't shed water onto your property at all. When the end of this is done, it is surveyed every lot, and I have to maintain that surveyed engineered drainage plan that is done, and it does take provisions. Even the water that hits the road all the way up Heard, all that water will go underground and all outlet at the south, at the northeast between 3 and 4. So all the water I now have will get channeled out that same outlet.
You're suggesting, Kevin, the water off Heard Street, and that's a part and parcel of this stormwater management issue for us, is because the last 2 summers, the heavier rains, like the shoulders of the road erode, right, just by the volume of water coming down the street in those heavy storms. And where your roadway, your entrance roadway adjacent to my property is going to go in, there's certainly a possibility there that you could end up with pools of water after heavy rainstorms. But you're suggesting there's going to be some type of process. Is it underground to do that, or culvert?
My stormwater management system in there, this is another feature of my subdivision, has been aesthetically pleasing. So there won't be ditches between my entry and your property. There will be underground ditches with a permeable pathway along the edge that the water goes into manholes, and underground pipes that take it all away. So any water that comes off of Heard onto our roadway hits that underground storm water management. All of the edges of the properties hit this permeable aesthetics area, and the water goes down and into these pipes and everything underground. So you won't have a ditch that you'll see. You won't have, even on your backyard, there'll be a slight tilt to the land that'll make sure the water goes to the north and to the east down those people's driveways. So it's definitely a well engineered and an aesthetically pleasing design from that point of view.
So it's a grading issue in sense and an underground movement.
Yeah.
So,
That'd be great if.
good. Sounds positive. We'll certainly glad to discuss it with you further at some point around, but
for sure.
And the other big issue for us, I guess, is and again, when we read in the package of documents, certainly the professionals and the engineers who assess this are suggesting that there's no reason to be concerned that this development would cause any significant impact to the water table and or drawdown in the area. And some of us, myself included, we're all on wells because we're not connected to the municipal water or sewer around here. So you put a development in, there's 7 properties. I understand it's not high density draw, but what if there is drawdown in the water table and we have problems with our wells? Is that, you're on your own, or, is it something that the municipality and the developer would be able to potentially acknowledge within a reasonable period of time that the development's concluded, and some cost sharing relief or something to address the solutions to rectify that, because our wells are our only water source.
Okay, so let's ask, I think both maybe the Conservation Authority and or the applicant, or maybe Ms. Martin and Ms. Landstra, who would like to take that first?
Well,
okay, Mr. Scott, and then, maybe we'll go to
part of the process to getting to this point was hydrogeological surveys. So as you were well visible of our well drilling efforts back there, we had to drill 3 test wells on that development. So out of the 7 lots, we already have 3 wells drilled, and they conducted flow tests on those wells. The engineering supported the 7, and the comments on the engineering from those flow rates was the water table there, the static level in their 1-hour pump downs, it was negligible, like less than a 12-inch drawdown. And in terms of water supply, that's a major amount of water that's available in that aquifer. Like from being a plumbing contractor, when we go and do wells to put pumps in, we see well tests, and you can see well drops of 50, 60, 70 feet in that 1-hour test. So to see this amount of water, I know the engineering, I would like Ms. Zander to speak a little bit about the provisions, but from a pure what they found boots on the ground studies, there's a ton of water in that development, and that was all 3 wells. They would run one well and measure the levels at the other 2 simultaneously to say we're drawing down with an extreme amount of demand in one well. What's it doing on those other 2? And they weren't even dropping. So the study was very strong in that sense, and maybe Tracy can speak to that after concern, because honestly, I don't know that, but
okay.
But Kevin, before we jump, do you have any knowledge at your fingertips on what the depth of those test wells are?
We're 200 and I don't know 100 and I think they're 150 to 175 feet. Like they're in there fairly good. I don't think we surpassed 200 feet.
Right, but then
I have that study, but I would have to get back to you on that.
That's okay. But keep in mind that those of us who are in the adjacent properties, these properties have been here since the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
These wells are not at that depth, right?
No, they would be in
wells are
different
40,
aquifers.
50 foot depth, right?
Yes. And at that point, they would be in different aquifers as well. From what I understand of aquifers, there's different levels of them, and we're definitely in a deeper pocket of it.
So, Mr. Scott, maybe we can go to Ms. Zander, if that's okay. And I'm sorry, I don't know the Laverne family. I don't know. Is it Mr. Laverne?
Roger.
Yeah. Roger, thank you.
Roger and Glenda. Yes.
And Glenda, thank you. So let's go to Ms. Zander, and I just want to cue, we're very appreciative for this conversation. I think it's extremely helpful. We do have another public meeting. So Roger, Mr. Laverne, we'll go back to you for your remaining questions after we hear from Ms. Zander, and make sure that you get what you need out of this meeting. And I know then we'll have to proceed to another public meeting. So Ms. Zander, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just very briefly, because I'm a planner, not a hydrogeologist,
Yes.
so not fully my expertise. I've certainly made note of Mr. Laverne's comments. And again, I think it might be better for us to come back with a bit more fulsome answer. But the studies that are done, hydrogeology studies that are done, there's extensive testing to meet the Ontario drinking water standards by Mr. Scott's experts, and then peer reviewed by the Conservation Authority experts. There's usually some contingency written into the hydrogeology study and implemented through the subdivision agreement. So if there are drinking water impacts to surrounding wells, there is, and I can't really give you the specifics of that off the top of my head here, but we can certainly get you that information. But yeah, there's usually some contingency plan so that if somebody's drinking water well is affected by, first of all, by the study, testing, the pump testing and stuff that's already occurred, and then the future build out of the subdivision, there's some contingencies in place to ensure that nearby property owners are protected. So, and Mr. Mosier,
yeah, I can see his hand is up.
Review. He may have further to add. We're passing it on. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mosier, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to clarify that actually the Conservation Authority doesn't review the hydrogeological report in this part of the world. It's done by, I believe, Golder and Associates. They are retained by the county, so it's not our office. So I don't have a specific comment for hydrogeology at this time.
Okay. But, and if the consulting agency that's acting on behalf of the counties were to flag anything, where would that information be found, Mr. Mosher? Do you know? You may not know. Okay,
Your
and you're
Worship,
muted.
the peer reviewer, which you're right, sorry, Phil, I think it's Golder, will provide their comments through the county. They will filter down to us as the applicants to respond to, and your staff and you councillors can also see those comments. So there's going to be some dialogue back and forth until the reviewer is fully satisfied that we've met Ontario drinking water standards and demonstrated suitable drinking water for the new lots without impact on surrounding lots. So that back and forth is still happening.
And maybe Ms. Lanstra, do you have any information to date on the status of those hydrological studies?
So we do have a copy of their documents within our office that have been submitted. And I believe the Lavernes, it sounds like you received a copy from the counties as well, from Elaine Mallory, who's the contact. So that's the current update we have. And once new information comes from the peer reviewer, like Ms. Sanders said, it will filter back through everyone and will get recirculated back to us at the office, and we can send that information out to the public as well as members of council.
Great. Okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is anything else?
The other ones are not that significant. We'll put them in the written package that we submit to the county. And my understanding from what their documentation is, the municipality will receive copies of whatever inputs they get. So, and the developer and the planning company. So great. Thank you for your time.
Mr. and Ms. Laverne, it would be beneficial for me to understand what those issues are, those remaining issues are. So if you could just name them very quickly, we won't answer them.
Okay,
just so I understand.
Two of them were the water issues, and we've addressed that.
Sounds good.
And the well issue.
Yep.
The other one, and it's probably more of an issue with the developer, with Mr. Scott. And him and I have discussed earlier when he first acquired the property. I've used that access lane that's going to become the road to that back property, because my property goes in and around behind some other lots, and I've got a barn and another workshop barn type of structures back there, that, and my gardens and things like that. So I wanted to see, how do we obtain an assurance that, well, there will be a public road that comes in to access the new development, that I have access from there into my back lot.
Okay. Ms. Leinster, can you speak to that, or Ms. Ander? Can either of you speak to that particular concern?
Your worship, I'm in my head trying to visualize which lot I think Mr. Laverne owns. So like that.
We're at 55 Heard Street. So
okay. Hasn't come up for me before. This is the first time I'm hearing this. So I've made a note of that. We'll certainly discuss that with Mr. Scott. Is that okay? Yeah.
And get back to the Laverne.
Yeah, I think it's really a question of the construction of the road and being able to veer off the road into my back property. Kevin would have some awareness because he's been in and out of there a few times.
And
Yeah, so that
Sure, I can
kinda
just
goes
add
to-
quickly.
Yeah, just Kevin,
Sorry.
if you could just wait one sec. Go ahead, Ms. Leinster.
I was just going to speak to if they're looking for access off of what would become a municipal road. We do have a municipal permitting process to allow for accesses off of municipal roads.
Okay.
So it could be reviewed through that process.
Okay. And
Is
Mr.
that
Scott,
something
anything
I
to
would
add?
have to apply for, or something that just comes out of the process of the approval here?
It typically is a user process, but we can speak internally and further conversation with the applicant and agent, and we can get back to you on that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Scott, anything else to add before we wrap up?
Just a little note about that is that my drainage along there will not be a ditch. So as far as like getting from the roadway to his property, it will be physically possible. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Great.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We're very appreciative of this public forum so that affected properties can ask all the good questions as alongside council, of course. It's what I'm just going to make a last call. I do recognize there were some other individuals in the room this evening, the virtual room. I haven't seen any hands up. Are there any remaining questions from members of the public in particular? Seeing any? Okay, I don't see any hands, so I'll take it that we're good on that front. With that in mind, colleagues, I would be closing this public meeting now. Of course, I will say, as per the provincially legislated preamble here, certainly, any member of the public who should wish to provide written comments regarding the plan of subdivision can still do so after the public meeting is adjourned. Written comments can be sent to the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville, attention Sherry Mills prior to the approval authority, providing a decision with respect to the draft plan of subdivision. That being said, Ms. Leinster, I'm assuming that you would also appreciate the benefit of those comments. So should they only be directed to Ms. Mills, or can people like Mr. and Ms. Laverne direct their comments to you as well? Can you just advise on the process?
The comments can go directly to the county. We do get circulated directly from them on any comments that are received. So it will be fed down from the approval authority to the municipality.
And if the comments are directed to you, do you feed them up then? Does
Correct.
it really matter? Okay.
Yes.
So either you or Ms. Mills is what I'm understanding.
Yes, to follow the Planning Act, if they can copy it to the county would be the best. But obviously, if we receive it, we would forward it on to them.
Okay, perfect. Okay, with that in mind, Ms. Ander, go ahead before I close the meeting. Just unmute. Yeah, just need to unmute.
There we go.
There you go.
Sorry. Thank you, Mayor Peckford. I guess we're left with one pretty big question, and that's block 1. And we've heard from a couple of councillors that there's some interest in having that. We've heard the staff position, the RVCA position, and don't necessarily need your feedback immediately, but that has a pretty big impact on how we configure the subdivision, because if we're going to change the lots to include block 1 back into the lots, or keep block 1 as a separate parcel. So I'm not sure what the follow-up from this meeting will be, but that's a pretty fundamental part of this, of how we configure the lot. So I'm not sure where that discussion needs to go next.
Ms. Leinster, do you have any initial comments on that?
Sure. So through Mayor to Council and the public, staff have taken notes of the council comments and opinions through this meeting. And as well. There was a bit of information related to the archaeological report in terms of setbacks that are new information to municipal staff. So we'd like a chance to take a look at that and see how that factors into block 1 as well. Staff have been working with the Conservation Authority and the counties to set up a meeting, which the applicant and agent will be invited to, I presume. So we will be furthering the conversation following this meeting, and all the comments that have been received will feed into that discussion.
And Ms. Lancer, just in terms of next steps, the recommendation that's being brought forward to council tonight is to receive this report. What is the next step, just by virtue of the fact that council has, from what I'm hearing, expressed a fairly strong interest in potentially acquiring those lands? So where does this go from here? And I understand there are implications to the pursuit of that route, if you will. So what would be the next step, and how would council, Mr. Scott and the public be advised?
Correct. So staff will work with all of the agencies, and this will be coming forward again to municipal council to receive all that information, as well as the municipal staff recommendation in terms of what the approval authority should do for the draft plan of subdivision, along with conditions for that. So that will be coming back to a future council meeting. And staff will bring information with all of these considerations from this meeting with a new staff report at that time.
Okay, and when do you expect, what's the timeline in your estimation? Several months, several weeks, or Ms. Martin, maybe you want to take that?
Thank you, Your Worship. It will be based on just the amount of time it'll take to work through the comments that I received tonight. I don't want to put a timeline. I will say we will work as quickly as we can with the developer to address it. But to that end, I'd be a little hesitant to put a hard timeline on it, just to give room to address the comments and the archaeological study review.
Okay. So with that in mind, as long as I think we've addressed that question to the degree we can this evening, I'm going to close the public meeting at 8:08 p.m. and appreciate and thank everyone for joining us this evening. In terms of the recommendation, council colleagues, at this point, we're just being asked that council receive the report titled Plan of Subdivision Heard Street 07T 20212 for information purposes, and I'll look for a mover and a seconder should that motion suffice for council purposes. I have Councillor Barkley and I'll need a seconder. Councillor Strachan, thank you. And Ms. Martin, I'm assuming that we can be confident in some of what you've expressed in terms of another look at that block 1, if you will, and its implications in terms of acquiring or not acquiring, and we'll bring that back. You will bring that back for our further consideration. Is that right?
That is correct, Your Worship.
Okay, perfect. Any other comments or questions, council colleagues, before I call the vote? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor, please raise your hands. Good. Thank you again to everyone who's joined us this evening for this public meeting. We do have another public meeting on the zoning bylaw amendments, colleagues. Looking to council and staff, would you appreciate a short break now? After this next public meeting, we get into the nitty-gritty of the proposed food truck bylaw amendments. So council colleagues, would you like a break now or at 8:30? Which is when I think we'll potentially be able to take a pause. Looking to you for direction. Would one be appreciated now or at 8:30? Keep going? All right, I'm going to keep going.
I'm just going to move Councillor Barkley, apologies, Your Worship, into the waiting room.
Sure. Okay.
Oh,
Councillor Sullivan? Oh, you're saying goodbye. Okay.
Now he's gone.
All right. Okay. So then we will go to the next meeting. Council will now hold a public meeting to consider a proposed zoning bylaw amendment application with respect to housekeeping amendments to revise additional residential unit policies for the rural residential zone and remove zoning provisions for refreshment vehicles that are regulated under a separate bylaw. I must advise you that this is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns you may have with respect to this proposed zoning bylaw amendment. If an appellant does not provide oral submissions at this meeting or written submissions before council adopts the proposed amendments, the local planning appeal tribunal may refuse to consider their objections. Any persons who wish further notice of council's decision concerning this matter shall give their full name, address, and postal code to the Deputy Director of Planning and Development, Ms. Crystal Landstra, following adjournment. Are there people here for this public meeting? I see no one. I see only staff and council. With that, I will pass the meeting over to Deputy Director of Planning, Ms. Landstra. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So through you, Madam Mayor, to council, before you, you have zoning bylaw amendment application ZBA-03-22, and it's a municipal wide zoning bylaw amendment that we've brought forward for some technical housekeeping amendments. So hopefully this will be short and sweet. Next slide, please. So staff have reviewed 4 specific amendments to the comprehensive zoning bylaw. There are 2 related to recent additional residential unit provisions and 2 related to refreshment vehicle provisions. So staff view the proposed changes as minor and technical in nature, and there is no development that's proposed in connection with this application. Next slide, please. So there are 2 amendments related to additional residential units. The first one is to amend the rural residential zone to permit an additional residential unit provided it can connect to existing servicing on the existing lot. So this amendment would allow an additional residential unit as of right on a rural residential zoned property if the property has adequate existing servicing on the subject lands. So this is being brought forward because it was provided under our secondary dwelling unit provisions up until last December when we brought forward the other amendment, and staff inadvertently removed this provision while ensuring the intent was to ensure that any additional residential units that would be on separate servicing would be required to review the hydrogeological reports to make sure there is no impacts to any existing systems. So what we're trying to do is add in the permission to have an additional residential unit if they're connecting to the existing servicing and not creating any additional servicing requirements on that rural residential lot. And then the second is to amend the general additional dwelling and dwelling unit section to remove a restrictive ownership clause that contradicts the recent additional residential unit provisions that were approved back in December 2021. So what this would do is remove a requirement for an additional dwelling and dwelling unit within the agricultural A1 zone and the rural zone to be used exclusively for those whose principal occupation is involved in the agricultural operation or who is a retiring farmer. So what the additional residential unit provisions that came into effect that were approved in December are more flexible, and they permit 2 additional residential units on the subject lands, and they do not have any caveats for relation to the farming operation. So staff are looking to remove the contradictory provision to be consistent with the intent of the recent additional residential unit amendments. Next slide. And then we're also bringing forward 2 amendments that are related to refreshment vehicles. Schedule B of bylaw 104-5. So we are looking to amend the definition section to remove the refreshment vehicle definition from the bylaw. So this amendment would remove the refreshment vehicle definition. And then we have an amendment that would look to amend the general provisions to remove section 6.45.1 mobile food or refreshment vehicles from the bylaw. So this amendment would remove all of the mobile food and refreshment vehicle provisions, from the comprehensive zoning bylaw, as it's considered for our purposes more an activity than a use, and it's duplicated within the regulatory bylaw that regulates refreshment vehicles that will be coming up next in the meeting. So the provisions being removed will be implemented through bylaw 35-22, which is a bylaw to amend bylaw 104-15. And removing the duplication allows for a more appropriate implementation of all of the refreshment vehicle program. Next slide, please. So staff have review, so the amendments have been reviewed by staff and have been deemed to be minor and technical in nature. Staff have applied the principles of good planning and are satisfied that the amendments meet the intent of the comprehensive zoning bylaw. So the intention of these amendments will be to provide clarity to our existing provisions, and for the purposes of refreshment vehicles, it will provide just one document that regulates those refreshment vehicles to remove any conflicting provisions and make it more clear for the residents. So that is everything. I'm available if you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was a very compacted run through, Ms. Leinster, of I think many different items. So appreciate your consideration. Council, any questions, comments here? None. I don't see any. Of course, I have one. And Ms. Leinster, just going back to the amendments around rural residential zone to permit additional residential unit provided it can connect to existing servicing on the lot. So this amendment is being made to conform with the flexibility we're trying to offer property owners, whether they are rural or urban. Do I have that right? I just want to be clear about what we're doing here.
Correct. So what we are trying to do is match the official plan has policies that does want us to direct additional residential units to existing servicing where it's possible to do that. What we had done in the previous amendment when we were focused on making sure there was no impacts to groundwater and existing wells and making sure the septic systems continued to work, we removed the permission which removed their ability to connect to their existing servicing. And what we're looking to do is still allow people who have no intention of changing anything to their servicing. We still want them to have the ability to put in those additional residential units and still create more affordable housing opportunities where we can.
Understood. Okay. And then just going back to that amendment, this amendment would, so there's an additional proposed amendment, would remove a requirement for additional dwellings and dwelling units within the ag zone and the rural zone to be used exclusively for those whose principal occupation is involved in the ag operation or who is a retiring farmer. I'm still trying to understand what ultimately is the implication of that modification. So could you plain language it a little bit?
Yes. So through our housing strategy that we currently have in draft, that Director Martin's working through, it was flagged in that report that we have contradictory provisions within the comprehensive zoning bylaw. The additional residential unit policies we put them in to be flexible and to capture a whole bunch of different users because that's what we want for our affordable housing units, which are these additional residential units. And what we found specifically for farming, we had requirements for for farm help essentially, or retiring, like it was specific to the user instead of the use. And they, under our current provisions, anyone could use those units. So we wanted to take out the contradictory language.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that explanation. Council colleagues, any other questions? Seeing none, we have no members of the public here. So that being said, I think I'll say at this point that as per the mandates of public meetings, please be advised that any member of the public who should wish to provide written comment regarding the proposed zoning bylaw amendment can still do so after the public meeting is adjourned. Written comment can be received up until the zoning bylaw amendment is considered by council, which I believe is this evening. We are considering this bylaw this evening, Ms. Lenstra. It is intended that council will consider the zoning bylaw amendment after the public meeting, so subsequent to the adjournment of this meeting is my understanding in this instance. So I am going to adjourn the public meeting, not seeing any other questions from council colleagues, and we're adjourning at 8:19 p.m. So going back to what is being asked of us this evening, Council colleagues, I'll be looking for a mover and a seconder for the following: that council approve and enact bylaw 3322 to amend the comprehensive zoning bylaw, 5012 to amend the existing residential unit provisions, and approve and enact bylaw 3422 to amend the comprehensive zoning bylaw, 5012 to remove the provisions with respect to refreshment vehicles. Colleagues, a mover and seconder, please. Councillor Wilson, a seconder. Councillor Stracan, thank you. And I will call the question unless there's further comments. Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hands. Good. Okay. Council, I am going to adjourn for 5 minutes. I don't expect the next section will necessarily take too long, but let's take 5 minutes just in case the conversation extends closer to 9. So just mute your camera and your video, and I'll see you in 5. Thank you. Okay, council colleagues, I think everyone is back. Thank you. At this point in our agenda, we are returning to the consideration of the refreshment vehicle update. And I believe, Ms. Martin, you'll be providing an overview of what has been a fairly fulsome process, certainly that began, I think, preceding your time as director, to update this bylaw to be forward-looking and more reflective of, I think, contemporary realities when it comes to the municipality. So welcome, go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you, Your Worship. As the slide deck just comes up, I think I just wanted to take a few seconds to recognize just the level of effort that have gone into the updating of our bylaw on the parts of staff and members of our community. You know, the staff met with members of the BIA, Chamber of Commerce, our Community and Economic Development Advisory Committee. We also met with our refreshment vehicle operators, who were all very instrumental in providing feedback as we embarked on this, what does seem like a very long journey to get here today with our recommended updates to the bylaw. But I would be remiss if I didn't also recognize the efforts of our Deputy Director, Crystal Landstra, as well as bylaw officer Josie Lizotte, who both worked considerably hard on this, as well as our clerk, who did quite a fulsome review. I know that these bylaws aren't easy to read, but the line by line review and guidance on this document was greatly appreciated. So if we'll just move to the next slide, I'll just jump into the presentation. So a little bit of background as to you know, how we've gotten here. So the municipality of North Grenville began regulating refreshment vehicles back in 2008. We've, over that time period of 14 years, only really updated the bylaw twice, and these were considered to be minor revisions. So there hasn't been a major relook at our current provisions in 14 years. So staff and refreshment vehicle operators identified a need to update the provisions. This need was definitely vocalized towards council, which is how it became action through resolution to bring this matter forward. And just to note that, you know, staff do interact with this bylaw when it comes to trying to find, you know, a location for a refreshment vehicle. And that was, you know, one of the items that was really stressed, was that it's difficult to locate in North Grenville. You know, the current provisions are just very hard to work within. And I know, personally, as a member of staff, I have spent hours using our GIS system trying to find, you know, where is an appropriate location within the confines of the bylaw. So we go to the next slide. So as I said, it was identified that our provisions in the bylaw were too restrictive, especially when it came to the setbacks. We had conflicting provisions within the refreshment vehicle bylaw, but as well as their zoning bylaw. And as what just happened probably about 10 minutes ago, we have now taken those provisions out of our zoning bylaw to remove that conflict. And the municipality has only really used a zoning approach to identify where a refreshment vehicle could locate. So currently we only permit them in the highway commercial lands, so lands that are zoned C3, and those can be quite limiting, as they're typically only really located along the County Road 43 and then just north on County Road 44, just around the municipal center. It was also identified that there were a lack of opportunities within the downtown. The municipal parks provided untapped potential, and there was no opportunities for collaboration or, as you will hear me say later, co-location. So some of those items that were raised, and again, there was more of a fulsome list that was provided as part of the report, were provided to us as staff for consideration. Next slide, please. So as part of the review, staff looked at other municipalities' bylaws to identify other municipal best practices. Sometimes it's great, don't reinvent the wheel when someone else has come up with some fantastic ideas. So we certainly looked at how other municipalities approach the licensing of refreshment vehicles. As mentioned, we met with the BIA, the Chamber of Commerce, and CDEC, and we also held a separate consultation session with our refreshment vehicle operators. I would definitely say that there was a lot of discussion. I didn't anticipate we'd use the full hour and a half, but we did. And since that session, I will say that I have had contact with multiple individuals who did attend the session for further follow-up and discussion. So up until even earlier this evening, there's still conversations going on, like seeking clarification. But in general, the messaging that we're hearing is that there's support for the proposed changes. Next slide, please. So what is new in the bylaw? And I'm going to go into these in a little more detail. So I can try and do my best to thoroughly explain the changes that we're making. So we're opening up new location opportunities. We've provided some new policies around our municipal parks. We've defined community special events and created a definition that makes them separate from private events. We've looked at licensing requirements updates, and then we also contemplated a fee structure review. Next slide, please. So creating the opportunities has to be one of the biggest items that's coming forward in the bylaw itself. So we're proposing and implementing a hybrid approach using both a corridor and a zoning approach. So the corridor approach would recognize areas such as along Van Buren Street, areas along County Road 43 and County Road 44, areas in the Rideau Saunders Triangle, as well as Prescott Street, for being areas where you could locate a refreshment vehicle. In any area that's within a corridor, the only consideration that from a setback perspective you would have to give would be to an existing food establishment. But if it's been identified on the attached mapping to the bylaw, you'd be able to locate on a property that abuts any of those corridors. So again, we're opening up a lot more opportunity than had previously existed, and we've expanded our zoning approach. So not only can you locate in the highway commercial lands, you can also locate in other commercial categories, including our C4 zone, which is our shopping center zoning. So that's typically what you would find in the Colonnade development, or our business enterprise or C5 zone. We have looked at the setback requirements. So the previous bylaw required a setback of 120 meters, which is quite excessive from a existing food establishment or a residential use. So we've defined in that corridor approach that if if it's identified in the corridor, you don't have to be set back from a residence by the requirement of 60 meters. But if you're locating in an area that's not within that corridor, you'd have to have some consideration where there are 4 or more residences in an area. The 60 meters reduced by half the value of the setback that was in the previous bylaw, I guess the current version of the bylaw until this bylaw is passed. And then we've also introduced provisions for co-location of refreshment vehicles. Refreshment vehicles would also be seen as a food establishment. So in order to allow for them to be located within 60 meters of another refreshment vehicle, we are providing opportunities for, written partnership to reduce that setback. So they would have that opportunity where you would have, 2 food trucks who would like to locate beside each other because they offer different services, food services or menus to their clientele. We'd be opening up that opportunity. The additional vehicle would have to still be able to provide an additional 3 parking spots. We're still cognizant of the fact that people will be coming to them, so they need to have those available facilities. Next slide, please. We're also looking at opening up the municipal parks and just making it very clear for refreshment carts. So think of an individual riding a bicycle-powered cart selling ice cream. We've also called it, and then lovingly, the food truck rodeo at Riverside Park. So the bylaw does contemplate some provisions for having a food truck festival the 3rd weekend of each month. We had originally looked at the 3rd Saturday, but through the consultation process, it was mentioned why not identify, a full weekend instead of just one day. And then we're looking at opening up a location at both Riverside Park and Southcore Park for a permanent or mobile canteen. So this would be done through a request for proposals process by the municipality, where we would identify a location in each park and ask interested refreshment vehicles to apply through the request for proposals process. And this is to ensure that it is a transparent process and that everybody is working under the same guidelines. Next slide, please. We've also taken efforts to define community special events. I think what was made very clear to staff during the consultation piece was, how do you differentiate between a refreshment vehicle attending, Canada Day versus, catering a private wedding on private property. So we've taken great lengths to define what a community special event is. So we, clearly define when you're required to be licensed by the municipality. Examples of community special events could include Canada Day, regattas, car shows, fairs, and music festivals, all of which happen in North Grenville. And like I mentioned, private functions such as weddings or private catering events that are not open to the public do not fall under that classification. Next slide, please. We've also taken links to update our application requirements, so ensuring that we're just providing clarity around that process. We've introduced provisions in regards to the revocation of a license should somebody be in contravention of our bylaw. But we've also created a 3-month application window for existing refreshment vehicles. That's from January 1st to March 31st. And that's to allow our existing operators a 3-month period to reconsider location within the municipality before a new food truck vendor from outside of the area is able to apply for a license. So as of April 1st each year, all food trucks, regardless of whether they're existing or new, would be able to apply. Next slide, please. We've also looked at the licenses that we have available for each of our food cart classifications. Our bylaw also goes into detail and defines the classification of refreshment vehicles. Before it was just one blanket definition. Now we've gone into a little more detail in regards to permanent canteens, mobile canteens, and refreshment carts, including muscle powered carts and towable carts. So as you can see, that staff are recommending this would be the limit on the number of licenses that are available in North Grenville. So permanent canteens would be capped at 12, mobile canteens would be capped at 6, and refreshment carts would be capped at 8. These numbers are recommended just based on more of our historical application numbers. We have approximately 7 food trucks that are in operation that on the permanent canteen side in North Grenville. So all that to say that these numbers were just based on more of that, the trends that we've seen in the different types of refreshment vehicles in North Grenville. I will also note that a operator can hold 2 licenses of different categories, but they can't hold the same, 2 of the same. So you couldn't have someone who applies for 2 permanent canteens in the sense that, the same refreshment vehicle. They might have multiple locations with different refreshment vehicles, but you could have, if, for instance, a food truck that does have the mobility component that would have a permanent location, but from time to time they may want to operate as a mobile canteen to go around under those provisions of the bylaw.
Ms. Martin,
Yep.
Ms. Martin, if I might I think it'll save time. I know that I was seeking some clarification from you on those definitions of permanent and mobile, because we understand, for example, no-go coffee truck, right? We were sort of seeing them as mobile, whereas you would be treating them as permanent based upon past practice, should it remain the same, of potentially a canteen on wheels that is engine powered, being stationed, if you will, in one permanent location for the season. Of course, with this new caveat that should they wish to be mobile and move around to different parts of the municipality, they could pursue a separate license. So I just wanted to clarify that that's what, for my council colleagues who may not have had the benefit of that conversation, that's what you intend by those definitions. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, good, thanks.
All right, next slide, please. So fee structures, this definitely was quite a discussion with our food truck operators. So I want to preface it and say that the bylaw doesn't include the user fees. The user fees in the municipality of North Grenville are implemented to through our user fees bylaw, which is a completely separate document. So at this time, any proposed changes to fees wouldn't come in effect until January 1st of next year. So typically we don't like to introduce fees midway through a year because it creates a bit of an unfair advantage to those who got their application in first. All that to say that staff are these numbers are not fixed. There's more consideration that will be going into them. Staff are going to continue to further review the fee structure in regards to the rates, but the proposal would be to create different rate levels based on the type of refreshment vehicle, and that comes down to just the level of inspection that's required. Obviously, a permanent canteen or a mobile canteen would be a lot larger than someone who's driving around a muscle-powered cart. Very different in size and in the requirements that they have within the vehicle itself. Staff had also contemplated a fee and presented this publicly in regards to a special events fee that is currently not considered as part of this bylaw. I will reiterate that refreshment vehicles participating in community special events will still be required to be licensed, so they still have to apply to the municipality. But the special events fee that was contemplated during the public consultation is currently not being considered as part of the update to this bylaw tonight, and that staff will further review and follow up with our community members, especially our community events, to better understand their operation and just the impacts overall when it comes to having these refreshment vehicles at their events. And then we've also wanted, we're contemplating introducing a student fee and a student rate, just to recognize that some students, we saw a great example in Aquanel last year where we had a student with a muscle-powered popsicle ice cream cart. It's a fantastic way for students to earn money when they're out of school. So just trying to support our student entrepreneurs in any way that we can. So just again, that preface that the implementation of the fees will not be occurring through the update to this bylaw. Staff will further review these fees and will communicate out to our community on this, and would provide that update through our user fees bylaw. Perfect. I think I just would be reiterating what that slide said. Mayor Peckford, Councillor O'Sullivan has her hand up. I don't know if you want to address her question now.
Yes, thank you. I didn't see that because I had to get back in. My connection just dropped, my video connection, not my audio connection. So with that in mind, I'll recognize Councillor O'Sullivan. I also see that Councillor Wilson and Strachan have their hands up. So Councillor, I'm sorry, I think I said O'Sullivan first, then Strachan, then Wilson. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Director Martin. Can you just clarify for me, please, this fee structure, say the permanent one, if you go back to that slide, $600, is that a year, a month, a season, what is a season if that's how it is?
So a season the term is January 1st to December 31st. So it would be the rate would be for the full year. And once a vehicle is licensed, or a refreshment vehicle is licensed by the municipality, they don't have to reapply for another license to participate in a community special event. So they would have that ability to participate.
So they would pay $600 for the whole year.
Yep.
To have their license here.
That is correct.
For a permanent or a mobile canteen. Okay. Okay, I think yeah. So then they would also pay to rent space from wherever they're renting it. Like if they're at a mall, they would then also pay for the mall space. Mm-hmm.
So any contract or agreement between a property owner and a refreshment vehicle would be between those two individuals. The municipality is not involved in that process.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you.
And just following, just as a point of clarification, not to introduce a different question, because of course we have Councillor Wilson and Strachan. Just to be clear, Ms. Martin, the proposed fee structure as it's presented today could change significantly, right? This is something that you're deferring for further consideration. So this was part of the thinking, is my understanding, and it's not obvious that these precise fees will or will not come into effect because it's subject to further internal and external consideration. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And then just one other question, or maybe a response to Councillor Sullivan. Certainly, I think we are aware, Councillor Sullivan, by virtue of some of the conversations that we've been having with both permanent and mobile canteens, that they are often paying, for access to the private property by virtue of a contract that is private between, obviously, the owner of a particular commercial lot and the food truck in question. So that's not atypical. Anyway, I will move on to Councillor Wilson and Councillor Strachan. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Peckford. Thank you, Mayor Peckford, through you to Director Martin. Could you explain to me what the transfer fees apply to? There's a
Yeah.
line item there.
Yep, through your worship to Councillor Wilson, that would be if there's a transfer of the license. So say you had maybe more in some of our permanent canteens, we might have a change of a owner on that canteen or on the mobile food truck, you'd be able to just apply for that ownership, not ownership change, but change in who the license is issued to.
One other question, and it might seem a little odd, but a permanent canteen is going to pay $600 a year for a licensing fee, whereas a mobile canteen will pay the same price. Permanent canteen will pay a rental fee on the property that they're on, but a mobile canteen can go from place to place and stop and serve customers and then leave. What was the logics to having them have the same fee structure?
Thank you, Councillor.
I know, I don't mean to put you on the spot,
no,
but
I do have an answer for you. So you have to understand that the fees that are being proposed and that we'll continue to review are based on staff time. So the staff time to do the inspection, to process the paperwork, to do the administration on it, and to provide the necessary approvals. Mobile canteens and permanent canteens often have the same mechanics. I mean, we do have some refreshment vehicles that can operate under both, so you can appreciate that they've got their their cooktops, they've got refrigeration systems, so the inspection requirements are quite greater on both, almost equal, so that's why they're sharing the same fee.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Stracan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Director Martin. I believe this was your next to last slide, so I have a couple of questions that aren't related to the fee structure. So regarding setbacks, 60 meters is still fairly significant when you're looking at the downtown core. Has there been any conversation, I guess, with the various stakeholders about further reducing that in order to allow for trucks in our downtown core, which doesn't have a lot of space to begin with?
Through your worship to Councillor Stracan, certainly we've had comment and feedback on the setback, even up until today, with different provisions or requests. I've had individuals indicate no setback, some with 40-meter setback might be more reasonable. It's not a perfect science. Like I mentioned earlier during the presentation, we took what we had previously existing, which was 120 meters, and cut it in half. Certainly, it's a number that can be further explored and addressed. I'm not certain if zero setback is the right answer. I think that we're still trying to provide a little bit of a buffer around our food establishments is appropriate, just to avoid a food truck establishing right outside their door. Another item that's been raised as well is that reduction in setbacks when you have written permission from a food establishment. So where they do recognize that, yes, we would like you to be located quite close to our establishment, and essentially it would be a refreshment vehicle they would see as being non-competitive to their business. So to that end, those were raised. They haven't been contemplated in the bylaw, but certainly staff could continue to further take those comments back for review and bring a future amendment to address those.
Okay, I have a few questions here, so I'm just sort of going to try and get through them very quickly. Regarding the setbacks, do we have, I tried to find online and I couldn't see anything obvious when we compared to other neighboring sort of communities that have similar downtown core where there are refreshment vehicles or the potential for them. Like if we look at Merrickville or Winchester, do they actually have any setback rules? I didn't see anything that actually spoke to refreshment vehicles or food trucks. I don't know if there's another name for them. For comparison's sake, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not overly familiar, and our bylaw enforcement officer did do the research on other bylaws and municipalities, so I wouldn't have that information on hand without going through notes. every municipality would regulate it differently in regards to setbacks. I live in Winchester, so I'm even thinking about where some of those food trucks are, and I can't say that they're relatively close to any food establishments. Other municipalities or communities I'm familiar with, Mississippi Mills, Almont, most of Almont's food trucks are located along Ottawa Street, which is the main kind of arterial road that runs through. I'm not really familiar if there's any in the downtown. I don't recall seeing any in the downtown, and they've got a really well-defined one as well. That would be a comparator to North Grenville. So municipalities do try to protect their downtown from, and oftentimes it's just restrictions, right? Look at Prescott Street is a very narrow road. To support food trucks within the road allowance would be very difficult because you'd be, one, losing out on parking, but two, it's already a very narrow street to try and support that. So oftentimes, in older downtowns, that's some of the issues that you run into. And that's why often you'll find many food trucks on the periphery. Doesn't mean they can't be located if they can find a place that works, which is why in the Appendix A of the map, we've opened up that opportunity, but there'll be a little bit of homework on the part of our refreshment vehicles to find that spot.
Okay, that's fair enough. I no problem with that answer. I realize that there's we don't necessarily have to conform to what other municipalities are doing. Made in North Grenville solution is perfectly acceptable and probably favorable in a lot of cases. Two other quick questions. I know that one of the stakeholders that was engaged was looking at the B&H parking lot area and looking at what else is in that space. The Kemptville Farmers Market is there as well. Were they part of any stakeholder conversations, or were they invited? I guess both questions.
The farmers market wasn't directly reached out to. Typically municipalities will, and I don't believe we do, but some municipalities do regulate farmers markets under different bylaws. To me, that would be more of a community special event because it's something that's held, not every day. It is a weekly event, but that's, it would be my understanding is how you would treat it as a special event for food trucks to attend.
I suppose I should have added more information. I was actually thinking of the opposite scenario where a food truck could be established in the B&H parking lot area and be offering a similar item, coffee, for example, that is also being sold at the Kemptville Farmers Market, baked goods, that kind of thing. If it was that, I'm sort of wondering if they were engaged from that perspective to see what their concerns may be, because they are only there one day a week. But I think you've already answered that question. I was just trying to give more context.
Yes, and Councilor Strachan, just follow up. The bylaw does permit where you have an approved location, you are a licensed refreshment vehicle, and there is a special event being held in the same area as you are still allowed to open and operate. We wouldn't force you to close down because there is a special event happening. And typically, if there's any events, more of the community events go through our FC process. We would identify that as part of that process, as that there is a permanent or a mobile or whatever refreshment vehicle is located there, just to keep that in mind as they're planning their event. That they can't ask them to leave is what I'm going to say.
I could see how that might be could be problematic, but I'm not on the Kemptville Farmers Market Board, so I'm not going to speak for them. But perhaps something that if any of them are listening, they may want to consider as part of the conversation. Final question. You brought up the requirements for refreshment vehicles coming for special events and so on. There was a concern raised about inspections and what inspections need to take place if these vehicles were, say, coming from the city of Ottawa and already have an existing inspection in place for that municipality. I believe that there's a requirement here to do an additional inspection based on our municipal requirements, correct?
That is correct, and it's required because it's from a liability perspective is why we require it. So I understand that they're licensed in another area, but they're still required to be licensed and inspected by our municipality in light of our guidelines.
And are those full inspections as if they were from our area as well? They're the same, they're held to the same standard. They have to undergo the same kind of visual inspection. There's no allowances made for already having an inspection completed somewhere else?
As far as I'm concerned, Councilor Strachan, that they would have to go through our full process. I don't believe there's an expedited process because you've been licensed elsewhere. without having a member of our bylaw services or fire services in attendance, I can't really give you that fulsome answer, but I would anticipate that they would still do the same review as if you were coming in as a non-licensed vehicle anywhere else.
Okay, I appreciate your answers. That was my final question. Thank you.
Mayor Peckford, we've lost your audio.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Just managing two screens. So thank you very much, Councillor Strachian. I'm going to go to Councillor Wilson next. And I see that Councillor O'Sullivan's hand is still up. And then I'm going to put myself on the list to just ask some further clarifying questions. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Wilson. Oh, and Councillor Wilson, you are muted. And we can only see half your head. I don't know if that matters. Maybe just lower your screen. There you go. Now we can see you.
The host muted me. Sorry, I was not muted. Thank you. Through you, Mayor Peckford, to Director Martin. Thank you, Councillor Strachian, because you asked some of the questions that I was going to ask, but I didn't know if it was the time to do it because I knew Amy wasn't finished her presentation. But I too was going to ask about the setbacks, hoping that maybe somewhere along the line in this discussion we could move it to be 40 meters rather than the 60 meters. So I when we come to that, that would be great. Part of the reason that we've asked for the Rideau Saunders Triangle to be part of this is that the B&H parking lot would be a great area to have some of these food trucks established. And through speaking with some of the farmers market people, they would welcome extra food trucks or extra food vendors for their farmers market because they're not always finding enough that are there. So I wanted to give that into addition. So anyways, that's pretty well all I have to say. There probably somebody will spark me to say something else further down the line, but thank you.
Oh, again, I'm on mute too. Thank you, Councillor Strachian. So I'll go to Councillor Sullivan and then I'll put myself on the list. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Martin. I have a number of questions or comments. I'll start with probably the one that I would say the most is that I think that if we have an opportunity to make some stipulations regarding refreshment trucks, that the permanent sites have to have some bicycle parking at them because a lot of people bike in the summertime to a chip wagon or the station or whatever, and would want to have a bike rack. I think that's important. And the next one is, was there any consideration for Ferguson Forest Center as a location? Because I think having something near the dog park or having something, well, near the dog park parking lot would probably be a bit of a gold mine for someone there with disc golf and cross-country skiing and the toboggan hill and the dog park. That would be a pretty lucrative site, I would think. So I don't know if that's being considered or if it's something that maybe Ferguson Forest would want to consider if they could get, if there would be a vendor who would want to take that location. And I agree with the 60 meter setback seems like a lot of space when you have a limited amount of space. And I think there's nothing wrong with healthy competition. And there's a significant difference between an inside established restaurant and a food truck or a refreshment truck. I mean, if it's the hot summer, you're going to have an air conditioned, you're going to have a nice table and chairs to sit at. You're going to be able to have beer and wine or any other alcohol if you're inside a restaurant versus a food truck. you're not going to have all of those things. And I think there's significant differences between those types of businesses and the clientele that they attract. So I would certainly consider in the future lowering that setback to 40 meters. Like I remember asking one time why Bush Taka and Mech and the Exploration Store were right, the three of them in the same block down in Westboro. And they said, it's really good for business. Somebody comes here to look for something at Mech and then they go to Bush Taka and then they go here, and like, it was very good for business. So when you think about food courts in a mall, there's all of the vendors are all chunked together at once, and that's where everybody goes. So I don't see a big problem with having healthy competition in close proximity. So I understand there's significant differences between what the establishments can offer or do offer. So I'm would be in favor of certainly loosening up the bylaw that exists right now and encourage people to go into this kind of business if that's what they want to do. But I really think if there's any reason why Ferguson Forest could not be included, if you could let me know, because I think that would be not that I'm going to go buy a chip wagon and start a business, but I think that would be a really good location, even if they just sold coffee.
So let's have Ms. Martin deal with the question of Ferguson Forest. And then I'm on the list and I see Councillor Strachian back on the list. So Ms. Martin, in terms of Ferguson Forest.
Thank you, Your Worship, to Councillor Sullivan. The Fergus Fortune Center wasn't considered, just given the relationship and how those lands are managed. I mean, certainly it would be a conversation we would have to have with the Ferguson Forestry Center before contemplating opening up that, you know, a location. And then the question would come into, you know, who would manage that relationship. So not an easy, straightforward answer or an easy, straightforward location at this time to address, but certainly should the Ferguson Forestry Center want to have that discussion, municipal staff could look at it, and it would potentially require further amendments to the bylaw, depending on what they'd want to do, but certainly something that could be considered if there is interest.
And just Ms. Martin, so I'm clear, it is by virtue of the fact that those lands are effectively managed by Ferguson Forest Corporation that they weren't included or considered as part of this bylaw. Do I have that right?
Yes, that is correct. And the feedback that we'd received as part of the consultation process didn't identify the Ferguson Forest lands as being a location that that they were interested in, or if food truck was interested in. More, you know, the larger locations are more so our parks, and more areas that were kind of more highly visible, so along our major corridors.
Right. Okay, so thank you. You know, as you know, it was Deputy Mayor Jim McManaman, former Deputy Mayor, and I think myself and perhaps also Councillor Strachian, who were initially tapped to think about this bylaw and updating this bylaw so that it better reflected, I think, sort of the contemporary realities here in North Grenville. And I think the pandemic sort of sidelined us. So from my perspective, again, I'm thrilled to see this come forward. I'm not sure it takes it the full distance, but certainly creates, I think, many more opportunities. I'm aware that there is a valued coffee truck that was a new entrant into the market, as an example, who by virtue of the existing bylaw was very much limited in terms of opportunity, and that would be true of other, you know, I guess we would call them permanent canteens, even though they're on wheels, you know, that I think are also looking to be here, right, you know, for the long haul, if you will, which has been the case for some of our other permanent canteens. You know, I certainly do have an appetite to see that, for council to land that setback in a way that allows for, you know, a vibrant downtown, not just, you know, County Road 43. So I have an appetite to address that this evening and see if perhaps, you know, what I'm hearing from council and, you know, through various discussions is maybe 40 meters would be you know, an appropriate place to start, certainly for North Grenville, given what we're trying to achieve and some of those limitations, particularly in the downtown quarter. At the same time, of course, you know, it it was Mr. Beveridge of B&H, who again was one of the early catalysts for us to really think this through, because what we're hearing, I think more than not, is often these, mobile or permanent food canteens, and even the food carts that we saw, one of which has been here for a longer period, and the ice cream muscle-powered cart that went around parts of Equinel last summer are big successes, and they are well embraced by our community. So I think ultimately we want to see an inclusive bylaw that creates new opportunities, and I think making sure our downtown is inclusive of that, while being 100% respectful of existing businesses is important. But from my perspective, I think the more we give people reasons to go downtown, in addition to County Road 43, the better. And that destination experience that I think our council and municipality and our fabulous tourism coordinator are trying to create is pretty key to some of that. So I appreciate all of your work, Ms. Martin. I think you've taken certainly what was a very old and antiquated bylaw and really invigorated it. So look forward to the remaining discussion. Councillor Strachian.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I am in agreement. I think the discussion about setbacks is probably worth having more in depth tonight, and reducing that number, I think, is generally what I'm hearing as well.
Yeah.
So in addition to this conversation, I would just like to say food trucks and restaurants do have significant differences, and there was a significant amount of tension during COVID when restrictions were put in place and restaurants were shut down and food trucks were able to operate because they were mobile. They could choose to come and go as they please. They could choose to operate anywhere. So I think that given the difference in overhead as well is significant between the two, and so there are there are pluses and minuses to each, but I would like just to say in response to Councillor O'Sullivan's comment that I think that this has come up recently in Ottawa, but nonetheless, it was connected to COVID restrictions and so on. However, I think it gave many pause and consideration that needed to be given about what the differences were. Having said that, the restaurants here are more than capable of speaking for themselves, and I wouldn't say that they feel the same way necessarily, but just wanted to highlight that there is definitely a quick Google search will get you some information as to how that went down during COVID and some of the concerns from restaurant owners. Ferguson Forest Centre, I personally wouldn't want to pursue that. I think, yes, it could be a cash crop for somebody. It's great for that, but it's also great that it's a natural space. We wouldn't want to have commercial shops or anything like that necessarily running throughout all of it. And I don't think that would be a great place to encourage that, because as much as, there's lots of traffic through there, it is also a place where people come to, escape from all of the other busyness, the noise, the other smells, and so on. And even if there is zero waste that's left behind, which one would hope would be the case, I think the other things sort of are disruptive to the peaceful nature of Ferguson Forest as well. The one thing I'm not sure entirely how this is captured, and I guess it is based on the co-location. So through you, Mayor, to Director Martin, regarding the deconfliction of similar types of restaurants and refreshment vehicles, is it stated within the bylaw as to how that is avoided, or is it just because the setback is such a distance, once you're a certain distance away, you're considered not to be in conflict, I guess, with a restaurant of a similar type? If I make myself,
I think she can explain that, because we did have that conversation. So Ms. Martin, over to you.
Co-location? So the co-location piece, through your worship to Councillor Strachian, would have there's just a written element of getting permission. So one of the items that was raised, the consultation process, and by a food truck operator, was that we need to make it clear that it's not just the permission of the property owner to be there, because property owner most certainly could say, hey, yeah, I'd like to have you here too, because I can rent out a space on my property, I've got lots of room, but you might not necessarily have that same relationship with the refreshment vehicle. So if you want to co-locate with another refreshment vehicle, you're going to need their permission if that's their existing spot, to avoid any of that potential conflict. And again, I know that refreshment vehicle operators work quite harmoniously. I definitely, through our consultation process, really got that impression that they're here to support each other, as and the community as well. So that was just one of the items that was raised, is that we've got partnerships we'd like to pursue. So that provision would just require just a written letter to state.
And then along those same lines, if you had a coffee truck and a coffee shop, so long as they're separated by the minimum required distance, they're no longer seen as being in conflict with each other. And so there's nothing else that's required, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And that's the intent around the setback, right? Is prevent, say, that coffee shop that's a fantastic example. Having a coffee, a mobile canteen or a more permanent canteen that just sells, coffee, or is the same type of business, setting up from, a coffee shop, and just trying to respect that, those businesses are bricks and mortar. They physically can't move. So, they can't change their reality as quickly as a permanent or a mobile canteen could.
Okay. And then I think that part of this is where I'm struggling with. So I recognize that it's considered a special event, the farmers market. It is almost in the same kind of idea as a mobile food truck, where it shows up once a week and it's selling a certain items and so on. I recognize that the farmers market may want to have, certain food trucks there to encourage other people to come out to round out sort of the types of things available for sale, food for sale, and so on. So I see that side of things. And I guess the flip side of that, which is, I think, perhaps I wasn't quite clear what I was trying to say, is that if there was, I'll use coffee as the example because it's an obvious one. If you have coffee and baked goods in a refreshment vehicle, but the once a week, the farmers market shows up and they have coffee and baked goods there, whether or not and again, not speaking for them, but just to say, that there could be something seen as that same kind of issue of, being in conflict with each other. And I don't know if you can get far enough away from each other in the B&H parking lot. You probably can. And then maybe that gets circumvented by, that setback distance. So I just sort of was trying to piece all those different parts together. So I'm not really looking for an answer. I was just wanting to put that as a comment. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I reflect on the B&H experience where they host a farmers market that in some cases sells remarkably similar and fresh produce, right? Remarkably similar fresh baked goods and breads and what have you. And both, the host, if you will, being the B&H business as well as the farmers market appear to have come out as winners. So I don't think that example applies in every instance when we talk about co-location, Councillor Strachan, to your point. But it certainly seems that there are a lot of synergies when it comes to the establishment of some of these food trucks, even in the context perhaps of more mobile, to your point, social events or food trucks, whether they're permanent or mobile. That being said,
sorry, if I can, I just wanted to say to that point, we haven't, because they're treated as a special event, there's no consultation that takes place with the farmers market. And I'm just wondering if it's, if there's a space to be offered for that, given that it is a recurring, there for half the year kind of thing, event, that maybe there's a possibility to open up a consultation to just put that question to them so that we can, it's not a surprise, or there's nothing, that's seen as untowards as far as the approach that's being taken. So I think that would allow the farmers market to speak on their behalf and not simply be seen as a, it's not a one-off special event. It's not just a Canada Day weekend or something like that. I don't know.
I'm sure Ms. Martin can take that into consideration as we move forward. Okay. The other thing I just wanted to mention briefly is I know, Ms. Martin, we did receive some suggestions to potentially look at curating some of the food trucks that come into the community that may not already be here, just so that obviously in rural communities in Eastern Ontario, it's not always easy to access different kinds of cuisine. And I think we saw last year that when it was offered, it was certainly well embraced, certainly by one of the newer entrants, if you will, that being Kerbalicious. So that being said, it was flagged for us that in the city of Ottawa, there is actually an independent committee, like arm's length from council, that takes a look every year at who is coming in and seeing if, they're sort of adding, if you will, to what's on offer, certainly through food trucks in particular, mobile or permanent, or canteens, whatever the terminology is that we use. So, I certainly think, we get a lot of feedback in the community sometimes where people are not particularly enthusiastic when they see another food chain, whether, it's a pizza shop or what have you, and recognize we don't really have control, any direct jurisdiction over those things. But given that we seem to have, we're in control of the regulatory environment when it comes to food canteens, it may be interesting to explore that down the road. And I know you did acknowledge in your report that that was something that could be of interest. And, once again, I can see that this was a very comprehensive exercise. It took a lot of work and a lot of staff resources. So I just wouldn't want to put that off too long, so that before we know it, maybe we're at that, upper limit, and we don't have any opportunity to influence who may come to the community and want to, have a more permanent presence here, even through a mobile or permanent food canteen, which is seasonal. It's not year round necessarily, though I recognize the license is year round. So just another flag. And as we know, this council is nearing the end of its mandate. So how this all, sees the light of day once we've gotten through this phase of updating the bylaw, I think is anyone's guess. But I wouldn't want to wait too long to potentially pursue that idea. So, look forward to more conversation on that front in particular. The other question I wanted to ask is, obviously permanent or mobile food canteens. I'll ask this: if you are a permanent canteen in this community, I'm assuming, and I asked this question on behalf of FATLAS, they have a number of canteens in our community, and those licenses have extended year after year. So once you're in North Grenville, is the annual licensing, if you will, a formality? Is that really what we're dealing with when it comes to how those licenses are resecured on an annual basis?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the licensing, it's still required. As an inspection is done annually. It's not just a one-time inspection. Our staff do go out and do re-inspect. So that's what that flag is, and that trigger is the reapplication for the license fee.
Okay. And however, it's assumed if you're here, right, more or less, unless something was egregious, that you would likely be relicensed, as has been the case for a number of permanent food canteens to date, of course, subject to the public health inspection and other municipal regulations. Is that correct?
That is correct. I haven't heard of otherwise, but I would say that we do have some longer standing permanent canteens that have been here for a while that are well established. I'm sure everybody knows by name, and everyone knows who makes the best poutine. So to that end, it's as much as it's a formality, it is that trigger for us to do those annual inspections from a liability perspective. Yeah,
I think we just want to be clear ourselves that this landscape doesn't alter the reality, right, for those who have been here a very long time. Okay, that sounds good. And, I was just thinking about the Ferguson Forest piece because I recognize what Councillor Sullivan is saying. There's a tremendous amount of activity. At the same time, I think the intention of this food truck bylaw is to get people into the community. And while it's very valuable, I think, to have some of those canteens on County Road 43 and 44, getting them into the downtown on a seasonal basis, or perhaps for those special events, I think is equally valuable. So I think the drawback to even considering Ferguson Forest, which may be at some point warranted, is that you lose that opportunity to introduce all those visitors to other facets of North Grenville, right? And I think that's part of what we're trying to do in terms of creating those destination experiences and offering different food options that meet many different needs in the community, whether you're parents of very small children who need something quick, and where can I go to meet that need, versus other demographics that might be looking for something a little more curated, and that need can be met whether it's through a restaurant or potentially through a food canteen. Those are the gist of my comments and questions right now. Council, I don't see any other hands. I believe Councillor Sullivan is still with us. So I'll look for a final round of comments. Okay, before we move to consideration of the bylaw itself. Any other comments, Councillor Hawley? Okay. So with that in mind, I did hear Councillor Sullivan, Councillor Strachan, and Councillor Wilson all signal a potential desire to reduce the setbacks to 40 meters to allow for a little more flexibility. So council colleagues, that would require that when we move the proposed bylaw or the proposed recommendation, which would be our motion, that we include that the setback reduction would be amended from the current 60 to the 40. So if that is your will, then I think as we move the motion, and the recommendation for the motion is that council approve and enact bylaw 3522 to repeal and replace Schedule B of bylaw 10415 to enact new provisions for operating refreshment vehicles in North Grenville. We would also move that staff reduce the current proposed setback from 60 meters to 40 meters. So I'm putting that language in there because I think that signals our intent as per this discussion. So would anyone like to move that recommendation? Okay. So again, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Sullivan, thank you. And I think Ms. Babcock Cormier, just to be clear, and then I'll go to you, Councillor Strachan, for your question. The recommendation that I've just read would also accommodate that proposed amendment to reduce the setbacks from 60 to 40, correct? Okay. Okay, so I'll look to a final round of questions or concerns on the bylaw as presented. Go ahead, Councillor Strachan.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Martin, because you've been involved in all these consultations and the question of setbacks has come up, and it's been a wide range of suggestions from nothing to, I guess, to what the current proposal is. Do you think that 40 meters will satisfy most of what has been asked of from the stakeholders?
Yeah, in general, it will. 40, I mean, I don't think as part of the consultation, we were really given a hard number as to, you know, what would be, you know, acceptable or not acceptable. I know 40 meters was mentioned by one operator, 0 meters was mentioned by another. Whether it's 0, whether it's 40, whether it's 50 or 60, I mean, it is a number, and it's just trying to create a little bit of space and respect around some of our existing establishments. So is any number correct or incorrect? The answer is no, and there's not a perfect science to it, but certainly if council would wish to reduce it down to 40 meters, staff would be supportive of that as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. I was more so just concerned whether or not that based on the consultation, if there was anything that jumped out at you to say that this would be problematic. So that answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah, and to Ms. Martin's point, given the discussion that I was part of, certainly that was really the range, right? No setback at all, just get rid of all of them. The 60 was on the table, 40 was on the table, 30 was on the table. So it sounds like 40 meters is the sweet spot for now, and it certainly can be reconsidered in the future. So we have a mover and a seconder for the motion. Yes, Ms. Martin.
Sorry, just to interject. I just want to clarify, because this is a question that's been raised. When we're measuring from that 40 meters, it's from building to building. It's not property line related. So you're literally measuring from the door of one establishment to the door of another establishment.
Thank you, Director Martin.
All right. Any other comments before I call the vote? I know we've had a very long evening, a little unexpected this evening. If there are none, then I will call the vote. All in favor, please. Good. Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Martin, for all of your work and the work that I know Josie, as well as Ms. Lanstra, among others. I apologize if I'm not mentioning some other key staff.
Yes, thanks, Amy, and your department.
Thank you, Amy, for all your answers to all my questions prior to all of this and
I would like-
engaging with the public.
I would like to add that from the perspective as my role of bylaw liaison, EPS liaison, had many conversations with Chief Oakham about this when it first came up. And I recognize that this is one of those areas where there's a bylaw, but there's a heck of a lot more behind it. And it's actually more of a planning issue and all of that. So I wanted to recognize that the complexities of this across staff was also challenging, but I'm glad to see that there was engagement across the departments to make this happen. So thank you very much.
Yeah, lots of work. Okay, good. So then, colleagues, I'll just go to the, I think we're near the end of our agenda. There were no other reports from departments this evening. There is no correspondence listed. I do not believe there is other business at the present time. Welcome back, Councillor Barkley.
Okay.
Now that we've completed consideration of the bylaw, Ms. Babcock-Cormier, I believe all the bylaws this evening have been addressed. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay. I do see Mr. Johnson has joined. We are in the period for questions from members of our community and the public. So I don't know if Mr. Johnson has a question. I believe Ms. Babcock-Cormier, you indicated there was something in the chat.
There is, Mr. Johnson has asked, sorry if I've missed this part of the discussion, where is the setback from the business measured from? Front door of building, edge of property where business is located.
And we have answered that question. Is that correct? Mr. Johnson, is there anything else you needed?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. So with that in mind, Ms. Babcock-Cormier, I'll just confirm that there are no other questions.
That's correct, Your Worship. There were no other questions from the public or the media.
Okay. And with that in mind, I'll go to the confirmation bylaw for this evening. Recommendation is that bylaw 3622 to confirm the proceedings of council at its regular meeting held on April 13th, 2022 be adopted and passed. Councillor Strachan, would you like to move that? And I'll look for a seconder. Councillor Barkley, you want a second? Okay, thank you. Any questions or concerns on the confirmation bylaw? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Good, thank you. And we'll move to adjournment this evening. And I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the fortunately non-debatable motion of adjournment. Councillor O'Sullivan, Councillor Wilson, looking to adjourn at 9:28 p.m. I'll call the vote. All in favor? Good. Okay. Thank you so much for your work this evening, colleagues. Ms. Babcock-Cormier, Ms. Martin, Council, have a good evening. Hope you get some rest. Take care.
Okay. Good night,
you all.
everyone.
Have a good
Happy
night.
Easter, everybody.
Happy Easter. Bye-bye.
Have a good night. Bye.
Bye.